And good morning. We are live for this weekly interview series. My name is Jorge Silva Puras. I'm the Dean at the CUNY School of Professional Studies. And today we have a very special guest, Assistant Dean Ruru Rusmin, who is the Director of our Office of Faculty Development and Instructional Technology. Ruru, good morning. How are you?
Good. Good morning. How are you?
Very good, very good. It's great to have you and welcome once more. This is the second time I think we conduct an
Yeah.
interview, or correct? So I just
Yes.
wanted to, for the benefit of those who maybe were not able to watch the first interview we did, maybe you can give us a little bit of your background, how you got to where you are today, what are your
hmm
particular interests in higher education, and then we'll get into the topic of today.
Sure. I've been in academia for quite a while now. I actually started in linguistics, applied linguistics, teaching English as a second language, and I taught for a while in that area. And at the same time, I was always involved in running sort of like ESL labs that use technology applications, hardware, software that would help learners with their English. And so, as time sort of passed, I became more and more interested in the technology aspects, and I widened out to
Hmm.
looking at how technology can be used in not only ESL, but many other areas of academia. And that's what I've been working in for the last 20 years. So, with hybrid learning, online learning, HiFlex, all kinds of things, working with faculty development and course development.
To hybrid learning, online learning, high flex. You have basically tested all different modal or most different modalities of instruction online. So today the topic is one that sometimes creates a little bit of confusion, but hopefully we'll go deep into it and clarify it. And it is the difference between synchronous and asynchronous online learning. Sometimes we see a program that is advertised as being 100% online. Well,
Right.
what does 100% online really mean? Right?
hmm
It is subject to interpretation. Does 100% online mean that you can do it at your own time, at your own pace? Or does it mean that you are going to take a class on Zoom, similar to what we're doing today? And it can be confusing, particularly for students. So I think it's important for us to start by clarifying what are the differences, primary differences between the sync and async online modalities of instruction? Maybe you can shed some light on that.
Sure. So, asynchronous, as the name says, means not bound by a particular time. So basically, if you have a 100% asynchronous class, that means you are not bound to be present in the class at any specific time. And you can actually engage with the content, engage with the instructor, and engage with your peers, your classmates, at the time of your choosing, right? That
Hmm.
doesn't necessarily mean that you have like, I don't know, 10 weeks and you can do it self-paced, right? So it
Correct.
doesn't necessarily equate to self-paced. You might be meeting deadlines at every week. So there's still deadlines in asynchronous courses, but when you engage with the materials, with the instructor and with the peers, it's at a time that is convenient to you, right? And synchronous, again, as the name says, synchronous means that there will be some times when you have to be present together with the instructor,
Hmm.
with your peers, with the instructor and with your peers, basically. So that's really what we mean by synchronous and asynchronous. And you'll hear both of those terms a lot with online classes, right?
Hmm.
And um, so you might hear that classes are 100% asynchronous. But
Yeah.
to be honest, there is no class that is 100% synchronous because even in traditional classroom learning, there's always been asynchronous elements like when you have to read the textbook on your own, when you have to do your
Right.
homework and
Right.
you do your
Right.
papers.
Of
You're
course.
doing that on your own time, and that part is asynchronous. So
So,
that's basics. Mhm.
so I guess a good recommendation would be for students who are looking at online courses or online programs is to find out whether those programs are asynchronous, synchronous, or hybrid, right? You could
Mhm.
have, in theory, and I have taught those courses as well, where you have, say, 2 sessions in the week.
Mhm.
Typically, courses meet a couple of times a week, and or your typical semester long course does. And I have taught courses in which one of those sessions is conducted synchronously online via Zoom or Teams or any of the other synchronous video modalities or platforms. And the second section has been taught asynchronously, meaning that it's not at a set time and date, but rather that the student can do it in his or her own time at his or her own pace within some restraints, of course.
Right.
Typically, at CUNY SPS, the School of Professional Studies, we do most of our courses or teach most of our courses in an asynchronous fashion, right?
That's correct.
But there is one caveat. That doesn't mean that you can take the course all at the same week or same month. You have to follow an order, correct? So maybe you can
Mhm.
talk a little bit how we do it at SPS.
Sure. So I'll just say first of all that I'm glad that CUNY has actually like clarified now for students, and this is recommended for all systems that you want to clarify for students when they are registering which of these modalities that they are registering for. So
Right.
asynchronous, as we said, is one thing. Synchronous means your class times will be set, and you're still going to meet at your class times. And then we use a term called blended, online mix, not blended, online, synchronous, online, asynchronous, and online mix to identify the synchronous and asynchronous together. And there are a few courses here at CUNY SPS where there is an online mix, and there are different ways of doing it. So it may be, as you said, like um, alternating sessions, maybe synchronous or asynchronous, or there might be 3 sessions in the beginning that are synchronous and then a chunk that are asynchronous, and then you come back and meet again for a few synchronous sessions. But the majority of our classes are what we call fully asynchronous. So you can meet um, your professor
Hmm.
still, right? But it is optional, right? So you can have meetups, live meetups with your instructor and with your classmates, but they would be optional, and all the other work is asynchronous. So week to week, you have a set of materials that you must go through. You have a set of interactions that you have with your peers, with your classmates. Could be discussions, could be some other sort of interactions in a building a collaborative document together. And then you have some sort of assignment that's due each week also with your instructor. So that's
Excellent.
what most of it is, but there are optional sessions which can be run during office hours or can be run as meetups, whatever they may be, and students can attend those in order to get sort of like the connection that
Hmm.
we all crave with a synchronous, with a convenience that we also really want to have with a asynchronous.
And that flexibility that many of our students need.
Mhm.
Of course, it's more convenient, but it's also a necessity. Many of our students are adults who work full time, sometimes have more than one job, so they need that flexibility to be able to complete their classes at a time and place and date that is more feasible for them within that schedule. Some of them also take care of families, so that is one of our core strength as a school, is that flexibility that we allow a very high quality, highly rated and ranked programs, but with that flexibility. So I imagine, Ruru, that some of our members of our audience might be asking themselves, and this is a tricky question to answer, right? But in terms of pedagogy, what is better, sync or async?
Right. There is no one straight up answer, right? So there are advantages of both. And so, what I think is more important or a more key sort of question is how can I make the best use what is the best pedagogical practices when you are doing either async or sync or a mix of the two, right?
Right. Hmm.
So we see, for example, that when we are looking at asynchronous elements or thinking about doing a fully asynchronous course, we want to take advantage of course, the convenience and flexibility for students. But we also want to think about accessibility, right? So
Yeah.
asynchronous tends to be more accessible. So you want to make sure that you provide um, the materials and activities in multiple formats so that students with different needs can take advantage of the wide variety of materials, formats, etc., that you can provide in an asynchronous environment. And you also want to take advantage when you are designing your asynchronous course or designing the asynchronous elements of your course. You want to take advantage of what I want to call persistence, right?
Hmm.
So, for example, let's just take discussions, for example. This is an
Yeah.
easy one. You can have really valuable discussions that are asynchronous and really valuable discussions that are synchronous. But what are you going to emphasize? So, in your asynchronous discussions, because the discussions persist through time, you have you have time to have more measured responses, right? So you
Okay.
might be able to delve deeper into certain topics. You have the space because discussion time is not limited by the classroom time. You have space for everyone to be involved in the discussion. So that's access, right? So you want to make sure you provide an opportunity for everyone to be able to express themselves, find their voice, and state their thoughts in the discussion, in an asynchronous discussion. So you want to take advantage of these sort of characteristics of asynchronous when you're designing your discussion question and how you're going to manage that discussion. Whereas in a synchronous discussion, hey, there you're going to have spontaneity, right?
Hmm.
You're going to have presence. You're going to have more student engagement, right? Because
Of
everyone's
course.
there at
Yeah.
the same time. All your attention is there, right? So you want to take advantage of that medium to have to be able to go off in different directions of the discussion, to be able to sort of express your enthusiasm um, for certain areas of the discussion and lead students as you're going through the discussion. And so you want to take advantage of that immediacy. So um, whichever medium you are working on, you just want to be able to take advantage of that medium. Um,
And George is adding on the comments, so I'm
mhm,
glad you say that, Ruru.
mhm,
George is saying, good point. Discussions done asynchronously tend to be more reflective and substantive if they lack the immediacy of synchronous, even if they lack the immediacy of synchronous discussion. And that is a very valid point. I actually reminded me of a matrix that you shared with me earlier, which I'm
mhm.
going to share on screen for the benefit of everyone, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about what this matrix represents in the context of what we're discussing right now.
Yes. So this matrix actually came about when we had the pandemic, when it first started. And so I thought it was a very useful way of thinking about um, how you want to engage with students and want to have students engage with each other. And again, there's nothing that says that one of these four quadrants in this matrix is better than the other, right? But you want to like consider what your needs are and consider which tools you want to use. And I think the point is also you don't want to necessarily get stuck in one quadrant, right? So I think
Hmm.
when we're talking about asynchronous and synchronous, one of the things we're talking about is immediacy, right? So you'll see that in the matrix, we have on the left hand side low immediacy, which is more aligned with asynchronous activities. And then
Hmm.
on the right side, we have high immediacy, which is, of course, more aligned with synchronous or live events, right? So again, you want to think about what you want to achieve in your class, and
Hmm.
think, in this particular topic, in this particular um, when students are engaging either with the content or with each other or with myself, do I want to have an activity that aligns towards low immediacy or high immediacy? Or do I want to have both activities, maybe one
Right.
after the other, right? So you make
Hmm.
a choice, right? And the other thing that I find interesting about this matrix is the bandwidth aspect, which is the vertical. So
Yeah.
we have high bandwidth and low bandwidth. So one of the things that we need to consider is, um, how difficult, um, or how resource intensive is it for students to have access to these, right? So there are times when you want to have low bandwidth sort of activities, like email, group chat, or messaging. These are very light, right? Easy for students to access. They don't necessarily need you to be sitting down at a particular place with a particular set of equipment, um, and they're very easily accessible, right? And they can be
Correct. Yeah.
used more spontaneously or more easily also by students. And then on the higher side, we have the high bandwidth ones. So as we'll see, having videos, it's great to have synchronous videos. Synchronous video sessions like meetups or office hours, virtual office hours, or etc. But we have to consider that these do require resources, right? So students need to have the equipment. Um, they need to have sort of the audio and video aspects of it, and losing any of that, they might need to have like a good broadband connection, a good internet connection. So if any of that is not available, then these activities become less accessible to students, right? So I think this is a very interesting matrix and a very
Hmm.
useful matrix when you're thinking about asynchronous and synchronous elements, and also what the needs are for the students to engage in those sort of activities.
Excellent. And I'm going to quote and put on the screen a comment from Anthony Picciano, who
Mhm.
was an interviewee in this series recently. And
Right.
Tony is saying asynchronous also allows students who are still developing their language skills, for instance, English as a second language, to slow the instructional process down so that they can fully engage with and understand curricular material. So that's
Exactly. All right. Yep. So
very
that
valuable.
hits back. I mean, often when we talk about asynchronous, we always talk about, convenience and flexibility, but we always need to sort of emphasize to students that they might not think about this immediately, right? But accessibility, right? So
Of course.
accessibility and kind of what Anthony's talking about here, like persistence, right? The persistence of materials allows for greater self-pacing, right? Allows for more individual control over the pacing of the
Correct.
course. So,
Correct. Correct. Now, let's talk a little bit about what might be the primary disadvantages of asynchronous. I've heard many colleagues say, "Oh, but you lose the live, the instantaneous reaction of your students. You cannot read your audience. You cannot modify your content as you go based on their reactions, their body language, their questions, their doubts. What do you have to say about that, Ruru?
I would say that yes, asynchronous is more structured to start, but I think that some of those aspects that have come up or some of those negatives can certainly be addressed with a well-designed asynchronous course, right?
Hmm.
So um, it is possible to design space into the asynchronous course so that you can follow student leads. I mean, all of us who've taught asynchronously know that each group of students every semester is going to be very different, right?
Of course. Yeah.
So that doesn't mean that you are going to facilitate the course, that you're going to lead the course, that you're going to respond to the students in the same way, obviously,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So you definitely want to build in spaces there. You want to build in spaces for the discussion, where you can respond to the students and say, hey, I see you're going off in this direction, which is really interesting. None of my other students have ever thought of this before, right? So you lead the discussion in towards certain areas. Again, if they're going astray, you can kind of lead them back. You have
Yeah.
space where you, as the instructor, are addressing the students. I mean, you need to be present there as well, right? These are not self-paced courses where students just, it's not a
That's right.
correspondence course.
That's right.
If your course is designed as a correspondence course, then definitely all those complaints, shall we say, would be valid. But if you
Yeah.
design your course as one where you are engaging with the students and students are engaging with the others, with each other, then you have those spaces
Of
to
course,
sort
and,
of
and
have
that
that.
that that leads me to comment on how we do it at SPS. That timely interaction, that timely addressing of questions, doubts from students is essential. We do encourage all our instructors and professors to turn around comments or questions or emails, respond to emails or chat comments very, very quickly, because that's part of that interaction in the asynchronous space. I want to add as well on the screen a comment by George. He's saying, as Ruru suggested, you can also have a flexibility matrix. Flexibility being perhaps the most important affordance of online instruction, the anytime, any place aspect. So we will definitely share the matrix at on the comment section. I also posted the link to Dan Stanford's website. So thank you very much for that comment, George. And that leads me to the next question, which is, what are some possible models for blending sync and async that you can
Hmm.
share with our audience?
Right. So I think one of the other ways to look at it when you're sort of trying to blend the two is how much autonomy you want to give to students, right? So you might consider when students are taking their first set of classes to give them more structure, right? And to give them more opportunities to have synchronous uh, sessions, right? So some possible models are, you could have like a fully synchronous course, right? With real-time lecture and class discussion.
Hmm.
Mm, I think a lot of us have done that as remote teaching, and it's not necessarily always been very well suited to the online environment. I think if we think about the flipped classroom model, that is actually a blend of synchronous and asynchronous. So students
Hmm.
are engaging with the materials, they're reading through the textbook units, etc., and working out some problems on their own. And then they come into the classroom for the synchronous part. And in the synchronous part, they work through the problems in groups, right, with the guidance of the faculty. So the flipped classroom is already a blend of synchronous and asynchronous in a way, right? But with, let's say, low autonomy for the students because
Sure.
all their activities are structured. You could have synchronous sessions with lab time, right? So I've seen this model as well. um, you might have like a 3-hour class, but during that 3-hour class, there is an hour where students are working either individually or in groups, but with the faculty circulating. So that's kind of a guidance. And that gives students some autonomy.
Hmm.
Um, you could have a mostly asynchronous model where students are working through the materials on their own, but with required check-ins with the faculty, right? So you could
Hmm.
require check-ins. You could require synchronous meetings with the faculty or with the class, right? So this is a model that we might see in some of our classes. Like you would be asked to come in. I'm not saying our classes, sorry, some of our one department in particular I'm thinking of. So you would have mostly independent learning, but there are times when you have to check in. And I've seen this with another department as well, that the check-ins don't have to be like the whole class, but the individual must check in with the instructor to talk about how their project is going, or to talk about the class, or to go over their assignments, etc.
Of
And
course.
then the model that we mostly use, which is self-directed, right? but with optional real-time meetings. So this gives the greatest autonomy for students. Mhm.
Hmm.
So students have the option to check in those real-time meetings, which I know that you've conducted yourself. And so that gives like the greatest flexibility, because those students who are perfectly fine working on their own through the materials and working asynchronously with their peers and with their faculty can do so. And those who like to engage with the instructor and possibly with their peers can attend those optional real-time synchronous meetings.
And one thing I make sure to do is if I do conduct those optional real time meetings, I always record them, obviously
Mhm.
with the authorization of the students, but I always record them so that for those who, for whatever reason, couldn't attend that real time meeting can benefit from that discussion. Because we, as you said, it's by definition optional. We don't want to force anyone who matriculated, enrolled in a fully asynchronous program to be expected to be present at any given day and time. But we do want to give that option to students who might benefit from that interaction. For instance, Professor Jason Breyer in our master's in data science does that very effectively. He
Mhm.
has office hours that allow that real time interaction, but also in a format that turns into a sort of lab in which they do programming live, and he
Right.
can explain, hey, this is the right code, or this is there's a mistake on this line, et cetera, et cetera. So that combination, I think it's really, really helpful. Let's see what other comments we have received from our audience. And I'm going to, since we
Mhm.
don't have that much time left, I'm going to put them on the screen, and hopefully
Okay.
you can react to some of them. Anthony says it is important for students to engage with each other in asynchronous discussion, not just with the instructor. Absolutely essential that that conversation among students, and as a matter of fact, that's what we do in most of our courses and most of our programs.
Right.
Uh,
So.
Peter is saying, I think async allows instructors to challenge students that already know more about the course material, keeping them engaged without
Mhm.
overstressing students that need more help. What do you think of that comment from Peter? Or what do you think of that comment from Peter?
Absolutely. Because again, this is about having greater flexibility, greater accessibility in an asynchronous environment. There, when you are in the synchronous environment, of course, you work through the readings at your own pace. But when you are in the class, you are bound by the pace of the group, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're
Mm-hmm.
bound by the pace of the group. And with the asynchronous, you have that greater flexibility and that greater autonomy. But I will just say that it's important to be able to teach students how to use that autonomy effectively, right?
Right.
And so that is one thing that we certainly talk about in our new student orientation, is like, how do you actually manage yourself? How do you actually manage your time? And how do you find what's the best way for you to work through an asynchronous class? Because it's important to prepare the students and not just throw them in and expect them to use their life skills, uh, which may or may not be developed depending on where the student is, in order to be managing their time effectively in an online class.
Yeah, and we do have um, a slightly older than regular type of student at the undergraduate level. Our typical student is close to 30 years old, so they bring some life experiences, a level of maturity that also allows for that self-direction, which is so essential in the asynchronous world. We do have a couple more questions, and unfortunately, given that we don't have much time, we won't get, Ruru, to the discussion on artificial intelligence and how it relates to modalities of teaching synchronously and asynchronously. So for sure, we're going to need a part three of this conversation. So maybe next week or in the following weeks, we can continue the conversation, but as it relates to online. But let me just show a couple of other questions. One from John Gallagher. Please ignore if you think not relevant. But any ideas about low residency? Anything you want to say about low residency, Ruru?
Well, I'm not sure what aspect you're getting about with low residency.
Okay, so we can touch offline with John. And finally, we have Carlos asking, would it be safe to say that asynchronous is better suited to measuring learning outcomes? And by that, he
Um,
means more efficient.
I'm gonna say that you can't say that one is gonna be better suited for one or the other because it depends on what learning outcome you're measuring, right? In fact, I
Mm-hmm.
was just having a discussion with a nursing faculty yesterday, and she was talking about how in viva examinations, right,
Mm-hmm.
put the nurses on the spot and say, "Hey, you have to." I don't know, you have to calculate the dosage for a particular patient, or you have to deal with some sort of medical situation. And sometimes having them on the spot, in person, or in a live situation could
Mm-hmm.
be a more accurate assessment of the learning outcome, which is, how to apply the knowledge that you've gained as a nurse in that certain medical situation. So really, I think it depends on what learning outcome you are measuring, right?
Okay, very good. So, Ruru, I imagine some of the members of our audience might want to be able to reach you or ask you questions. I'm sharing
Hmm.
on the screen your email, ruru.rusmin@cuny.edu. But I understand you also have a website you will like to direct our audience to. What is that website? And I can
Right.
share it on the screen as well. It's
Uh-huh. So this website is
spsfaculty.com.
the website for our unit, which is Office of Faculty Development and Instructional Technology, or OFDIT, right? So it is the faculty community site is what we call it. So this is where we provide all our resources for faculty, and where you can communicate with us. You can see what we do, right? How we support with multimedia, with e-portfolios, with OER and open pedagogy development, with accessibility in UDL, our course development workshops. I mean, our course development services, our workshops, our trainings, our support resources, everything can be found there. And also you'll get to meet all the team members there.
Excellent. Well,
So please
thank you
visit
so
us.
much. Thank you so much, Ruru, and we'll definitely continue this
Thank
conversation.
you for the
Uh,
opportunity.
yeah, it's been great. I think thought-provoking discussion on the pros, cons, benefits of async versus sync and the blended modalities. So thanks for joining us. Thank you, everyone in the audience, for joining us this week. As usual, we meet every Tuesday at 9 a.m. via LinkedIn Live and other social media platforms. And we look forward to seeing you in the next one. So thanks so much. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you soon.
All right. Thank you.